Hello and welcome to this VMUG series presentation. My name is Rick Vanover from Veeam. I'm going to be the presenter from this. I'm on the product team at Veeam. I'm a 10-year VMware vExpert and have been to many of the VMUGs and hope to see you at one soon. The topic today is backups across the board from VMs to cloud and Kubernetes made easy. So let's jump into it. So as an agenda, what we're going to talk about here is really those categories, and if we were doing this online we can have some Q&A sessions, but we can't, so what we're going to do is direct that to the virtual platform. But definitely appreciate your time here on this, but let's jump into it. So I actually spend a lot of time with companies talking about Veeam and virtual machine backups. In fact, it probably is by far the most popular topic when it comes to Veeam backing up virtual machines. In fact, there is a perception, Veeam for virtual, right? I challenged a lot of people in the market, look at the integration we have with VMware, really good story. But for some people, we still have to reintroduce that. So that's the goal here with this first part real quickly. So the reality is, Veeam is known for these virtual machine backups in vSphere as having a great story around instant recovery. So it was actually 11 years ago. Instant VM recovery was a capability that came out to VMware and I think truly revolutionized backup. And it's been enhanced every single release since. So this is a very capable technology for you today. When you think about what you're putting on your vSphere platforms, and your VMware Cloud platforms for that matter, to be able to have this type of great backup and recovery, and especially the ability to automate your SLAs for recovery time and point objectives. Now that goes into our orchestrator product. It becomes this like a layer of an onion. You just keep peeling and going deeper and deeper, and it's very powerful. Now we also have to be ready for the cloud today. I love the portability options, whether it's VMware Cloud on AWS, if you think about on-premises to the cloud, if you think about from a cloud to on-premises, it's actually very flexible. And the image-based backups that Veeam takes can be restored to any platform. Example, you could be using another hypervisor and restore those instantly over to VMware. Or even physical systems, if they've failed, you can easily restore them to the cloud or restore them to a VMware hypervisor. Very powerful. And then at the end of the day, we need to have a lot of options to keep that data safe. Here at Veeam, if you think about ransomware, the backup product is essential for your ability to get out of ransomware. And I spend a lot of my time working with customers and partners on the best advice on how to beat ransomware. And we have a couple links here on that in a second. But the reality is, when it comes to the end of the line, you need to be able to recover data. And there's a lot of capabilities out there today. The ultra resilient backups, which I'll talk about and have a link to in the paper, that makes a big deal for your data today. So here's that mobility story: on-premises data to the cloud, to service providers, to on-premises devices, physical servers. And a lot of times people say, well, can I go from this to that? The real easy thing to know is you can go, basically all of your options are the strongest with VMware, right? If you think about the level of integration, the breadth of the platform here at Veeam, there's no stronger set of integrations than with VMware. And what's key to that, and let's see if I can break out the pen here real quick, is that we have this notion of a portable data format. So the Veeam backup file is that kind of output of a backup job. Now it changes a little bit in the cloud. For example, some of the hyperscale public cloud implementations, we do what's called a OVBK or Object VBK. And we could take any of these platforms and restore them in vSphere, right? So it's really powerful in that regard. And then also to VMware Cloud on the hyperscalers, for example, VMware Cloud on AWS, Azure VMware Solution, Google VMware Engine, those types of things are really powerful. And you can take a look at kind of the charts here on where they sit. There's no stronger set of integrations than vSphere. It's the real takeaway for sure. So we also, again, we got to think about this cybersecurity story. And here at Veeam, we've really taken a a rather focused approach when it comes to backup, data protection, coupled with the threats on our data. So the NIST cybersecurity framework, for example, when it comes to ransomware, the fight that we deal with here in the market, this is a good model. The NIST cybersecurity framework is a collection of 5 critical functions: identification, protection, detection, response, and recover. And the reality is this recipe is actually pretty powerful. It'll really give you a lot of options in like this kind of circular motion of, well, we have to know what we're talking about. And then once we know what we're talking about, we can protect it. Once we have it protected, we know the data that we have protection. Let's get into detection capabilities. And then once the detection function aligns well, we can get into response and recovery options. So those kind of mindsets, those models, make the difference. And what we have here in these columns are Veeam capabilities mapped to these functions. And the thought here is that, if you're talking about just simply having a backup done and immutable storage options, right? All of these things align very well. And the other important point is that actually you have the complete set of Veeam capability options with VMware. When I talk to people on other hypervisors, I say, well, you can't use that on this hypervisor. Well, it doesn't work with that. If you've virtualized your infrastructure, this is the way. You have a lot of options. And speaking of options, this is actually, in my opinion, one of the most important things that we have here at Veeam. And likewise, you have the most options here on VMware. So what we're looking at, this is our kind of flow chart of recovery options or recovery scenarios. Here at Veeam, there's over 91 different, there's 91 ways to recover data with Veeam backup and replication. And this also implies for Cloud Director, it implies for tape, to the cloud, to service providers, which a lot of those are VMware as well. The application story, instant VM recovery, low-level disk things like first-class disk restore. This is very important because you want to restore the right amount of time of data in the quickest manner in the most appropriate format. Example, somebody deletes a database. Well, and that database is on a database server with, say, a bunch of other enterprise applications. And, the last thing you want to do is actually bring back the entire database server with other enterprise applications basically rolled back. That might not be the right thing to do. But going into this list and taking a look at the different options and say Veeam Explorer for SQL Server, that might be what I need to do. And let's pull back, just the MDF file, or let's pull just the latest restore point in that database, right? These types of options are the ones that'll make the difference for you. So that number, I think, is really strong. I don't think any product out there can touch it, especially for VMware backups when they are agentless. Now, again, if you're familiar with Veeam, you know about backup, but probably one of the most disruptive things we've done in the market came actually this year, and that's continuous data protection, or CDP. That is a VMware-only capability. This is really powerful. You can have recovery point objectives as low as 2 seconds. In this example, it's set to 2. But the thought is it's using the vSphere APIs for I/O filtering, and you can have very, very low-level RPO coupled with a very low RTO. So Veeam replication has a very quick recovery time objective as well. This is a new capability. If you have those tier 1 workloads, I'll be the first to say it's not for everything, because the CDP proxies have a good amount of RAM requirements, right? So you don't want to do this for everything. But that top 5% of your top 10% of your workloads, this might be something to think about. And you can still have a backup too. The most important part, I think, when you look at the market, especially for this type of capability, is there's a lot of organizations that want this, but then it becomes quickly very cumbersome, quickly very expensive. And neither of those characteristics apply here to the Veeam implementation. The best thing to know is that this is included with the Veeam Universal License, and It's a wizard-driven, policy-based interface, and it's built into Veeam Backup and Replication. Really should check this out if you need something like that. Now this is kind of a simple view of how it's implemented. So I mentioned that there's a filter. So this is installed on the host. The vSphere APIs for I/O filtering, our implementation would sit here and then leverage a proxy, which is the data mover specifically for CDP. Now if you have a backup server in play, it can also be a CDP proxy, but it isn't necessarily the same by default. And real simple, it moves over this way. It's a very simple implementation. The Veeam Backup and Replication server will coordinate these components and give you those RPOs as well as direct the failover to that point in time when needed. Good stuff. So I got a couple of resources I want to highlight. Again, we have a short amount of time and we're covering VMware Cloud and Kubernetes. The ransomware series papers has been updated. This is a good one. I went through in this white paper that I did with Edwin all of the latest Veeam recommendations for V11, and then also there is the best practices guide, which is really powerful and very, very heavily weighted towards VMware deployments. That is implemented by our system architects, and they are field proven practices. And then for the managers in the room, check out the data protection report. It's one of those industry focused resources that highlight what's going on in the market. All right, let's go to chapter 3. Let's go to the cloud. Now, cloud native, I've been doing a lot with this myself, and I keep finding myself doing more and more, but I kind of feel hybrid is the way to go. Some organizations are Amazon, some are Azure, some are multi, some are Google, but there's always some on-prem in the mix too. And cloud native backup and recovery at Veeam is actually made very easy. And I'll also say that our service providers are an interesting model too. They provide some unique offerings that we would be remiss if we didn't mention that. So there are 6 main outcomes you can get with cloud native backup with Veeam. Number 1, backup recovery and DR. I mean, that's why people do it. Once the cloud gets sticky and you start having workloads become production there, this is something you'll need to think about, being able to back up and recover. And you also have really good hybrid stories. I mean, you can have that data come back on premises. You can drive recoveries as well. You also can gain some cost control, have some visibility and estimates of the cloud native backups. I love that because it'll differentiate between the cost of a cloud backup and a cloud snapshot. They are not the same. And you don't want to be in the situation where you're balancing your compliance with your cost or your budget. So we can help you with that. And then the mobility story. I love it, love it, love it. I can take an on-premises VMware virtual machine, run it in VMware Cloud on AWS, and you know what? If I need to move it back to on-prem, no problem. Or if I take it from another hypervisor to VMware, no problem. And then also, the controls from a security and compliance perspective, and that's more than just ransomware, but I think that is something that we need to keep in mind. And then there is the continual look for the single pane of glass. What we've done with the products over the years is really kind of bring them into backup and replication so that one console to rule them all is there. And then really just be ready for what may happen. Whether it's fire, flood, and blood, ransomware, malicious administrator, you name it. I've seen nothing but evidence of bad things happening to good data, so we need to have a good backup. And these cloud native backup products, they sit in the marketplace, which is really cool. Now, if you're just getting started in the cloud, one of the kind of important things I want to highlight is, actually it's right there at least on the Amazon one straight away, there is a free edition. And the free edition is a good way to start right there, and all of the clouds have it. It might show up as a different edition in the different marketplaces, but basically if you deploy it without a license, it'll run in the free edition. And these backups are really interchangeable. I spoke to one organization that is getting into consolidating to one cloud from 2 clouds, and this was actually pretty instrumental in them doing that for some of their workloads. So pretty powerful play. And then the other thing you should know is that there's this notion of an external repository, or inside of this application it's called a repository. That's the object storage backups, different from the compute snapshots. Those you can see on premises and drive recoveries. Hybridity is nice. But one of the things I want to highlight that I honestly keep talking to customers more and more about is VMware Cloud on AWS. So we have a dedicated KB just for the characteristics of that platform. I encourage you to check that out. Just a simple Bing or Google search to KB2414 will take you there. And what you can see here is just a real simple view. You can have these backups of your VMware Cloud on AWS clusters, and you can have some of the components stored in the rest of Amazon. So this is great. I see a lot of organizations wanting different architectures, different configurations, and this is a complete separate domain of failure example. If I look at this cluster of VMware Cloud on AWS, what we have here is the backups being stored in the public AWS, and basically you can have the Linux hardened repository, you can have S3, you can have a lot of different options on a completely separate control plane, right? So this is very versatile, very powerful in that regard. And the other thing about VMware Cloud on AWS is that it's suitable for replication. So on-prem to VMC, VMC to VMC, VMC to on-prem. You can draw the arrows basically any way you want. Not to be outdone, the Azure VMware solution, guess what? Functions very similar. And guess what? Veeam KB4012 can help you out there. This is a very similar set of use cases. It's good for production environments, it's good for backup and DR, and you have the adjacency to the rest of the public cloud. So I would recommend, if you're using the Azure VMware solution, or if you're a more Azure-focused shop, this is a good place to start. And again, if you're hybrid with on-prem resources, this aligns well. And it doesn't stop there. There's also the Google VMware engine. Guess what? We have a KB 3178. Now, there will be one kind of thing. Some of the cloud platforms don't provide us that direct storage to the NFS data store, so we can't do all of the advanced Veeam features, which are listed like example right there. But nonetheless, it's a great way to have this single control plane across the different parts of the cloud. All right, moving on, chapter 3. Still cloud, but a little bit different. Kubernetes backups on VMware. And now we're right off of VMworld. I was really stoked about the Tanzu Community Edition announcement. In fact, I have to get playing on that. And if you haven't done that yourself, you probably should. So Kubernetes backups on VMware are really sitting right in Veeam's wheelhouse. We have a great VMware story over time. And if you don't know, Veeam made an acquisition of Kasten, which we'll talk about here in a second, which really brings this good motion into place. And so the reality is there's a lot of components in Kubernetes. The data, which a lot of times sits up on this top set here in the containers, and then also the core of the Kubernetes orchestration platform is where those the applications will run. And there's a lot of components. I'll be honest with you. I've been on a Kubernetes learning journey myself. I try to give an hour a day or so, and I found that it's very varied. And whether you're on this platform or that platform, I personally have been working on like AKS, the Azure Kubernetes Service, but that's different than EKS. That's different than GKE and Tanzu and these other things. But the reality is there's a lot of common components here. Now, some of this might be specific to Amazon, for example, but the reality is there's data, there's the distribution, and then there's the actual underlying infrastructure. And Michael Cade on the Veeam product strategy team likes to say, Kubernetes is hard enough, backup doesn't have to be. So if you zone this into the VMware kind of menu, there's really 3 flavors. One is the bring your own Kubernetes, right? So Red Hat OpenShift, Rancher, etc., which leverages the VMware drivers for containers. And then in the middle is the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, TKG, which has a number of other different kind of components and such, and it's for relatively modern vSphere platforms. And then VMware with Tanzu. And I kind of feel like this is where it's going, especially if you think about Tanzu Community Edition. This is where I think we're going to see a little bit more of a adoption in the VMware space. And I'm actually pretty excited about this, because if you look at the Veeam implementation, which is ready to go on these platforms, you have some good options in the cloud too. So Kubernetes by itself, there's a need, okay? And much like the cloud, like if you talk about EC2 and Amazon or Azure VMs, once it gets into the cloud, it gets a little sticky. And the thought is, if I'm using these cloud services, it kind of is production data, and I might want to start caring about it and protecting it. So the same goes for Kubernetes. There are at least 3 critical functions I would highlight that you need. 1, backup and recovery. This application that we're going to deploy in Kubernetes, if it's important, we would need backup and recovery capabilities. And the other side is things like application mobility. I talk to a lot of organizations that are consolidating their platforms or moving their platforms. We live in a world today where a Kubernetes app built on, say, built on GKE in Google can be backed up and restored to Tanzu, or backed up and restored to AKS, right? That's kind of cool, honestly. And then there's also, like I mentioned earlier, fire, flood, and blood. There's disaster recovery scenarios where you might need to recover your Kubernetes application just like you would any other critical application. And then some of the details come into play, such as, role-based access control, cluster upgrades, transformations of the application across the platforms, and then cross-region, hybrid, et cetera, et cetera. And then really specific things like polyglot persistence, which is the database view of an application as it goes across a single cloud native application, meaning one application have maybe different databases, but it performs the same way. There's a lot to it, but backup shouldn't be hard. And so that's where I think there's a good opportunity for Kasten K10. So I mentioned a second ago that Veeam acquired Kasten in October of 2020, and this was Kubernetes backup. And it is really pretty smart because it takes a look at the applications in a cluster. That's not the right color. Let's reset that. Let's go back to red. Let's just do the laser pointer. We'll look at applications in a cluster, and then we'll have backup policies for it, and then we have a good view of what we're backing up. And whether it's the full view of the applications, which Kasten K10 itself is a Kubernetes application, which really helps fit within the platform. Building these policies and having it easy to use to give you these outcomes of backup recovery, DR, and application mobility, and keeping everything secure. That's kind of where we are in the world today with this type of option. And when you think about Kubernetes, whether it's Tanzu or some of the cloud options, you need to have these types of views to back stuff up. Now, I hope this information was helpful, but the reality is you can always go and get more. So if you go on over to the Veeam website, we've got a lot of information about both Kasten and Veeam, and then the public cloud backup products. You can always go get some of the free editions and trials, and you can do that directly from the marketplaces. And then lastly, here's the specific. The top link goes to the Kasten.io page, and then Veeam Availability Suite, which is a product that kind of I highlighted with the VM backup. That is, you can download that right there from that QR code. And one of the interesting things about the Veeam Availability Suite trial is that brings you the CDP capability as well as just regular VM backup. And if you don't have a license, you can have the Community Edition. One of the things we've taken really seriously here at Veeam is the ability to have like a free edition, a Community Edition. And even if you're using, like, say, for example, some of the integrated storages that we have at Veeam, which is basically all of them now, you can even do VM level recovery through Veeam Explorer for storage snapshots, and that's actually included for free. So if we look at the those 91 ways to recover, for example, if we go back up over there, you'll see that there are let's see, let's go back a little bit. The Veeam Explorer for storage snapshots, for example, those recovery options, right? You can pull an entire virtual machine out, a virtual disk, or application items. You can do that for free. Yeah, I did say that for free. The free edition can do those Veeam Explorer for storage snapshot type recoveries, so you can have some really good ways to do that. All right, well, I hope this was a quick, helpful little session here at the VMUG user con and the regular group events. My name's Rick Vanover here at Veeam, and hope to see you at the next VMworld. Hope to see you at the Veeam booth at another event, VeeamON and other things like that. Here's a couple links, and if you have any more questions, just go to veeam.com. Thanks for attending, and enjoy the rest of the VMUG.